Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. I wanted to say, they were recognizing the therapists and counselors in the background, and I just want to say thank you to Centers and, of course, Laura Bush Institute for having us here, but to the people who are providing services. We're going to talk about the impact of mental health, and I cannot tell you how much those services are paramount to the well-being of our communities here in Texas. So I thank you personally for the work that you do. So I am Dr. Amanda Mathias. I'm the Senior Vice President of Clinical Policy and Innovation, as well as the Regional Director for the Texas Panhandle at the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute. I've been at the Institute for about 7 years. And if you don't know much about us, we're a nonpartisan, data-driven research policy institute. Our formal launch was in April of 2014, so we're a little over 8 years old. If you know any 8-year-olds, you know that they are rambunctious, they talk a lot, they're always questioning the world around them. Why is it this way? What if it were that way? And just, well, anywhere they go, they want to shake things up, and some of them think they know it all. And that pretty much sums up the Institute at this point. We have, from the beginning, wanted to be a disruptive force that brought attention and change to the way that people think about and access mental health care. And we wanted to be that trusted, nonpartisan source so that we could provide reliable information to our policymakers and our community members so that they could make informed decisions about how they were going to create their systems. Because we know there has to be sort of a coordination and a symbiotic relationship between our state regulators and our local systems. And so I'll give you an example. Recently I was doing some work, I've worked all over Texas. I was doing some work in the Texas Panhandle, and up there we have a lot of, I'm actually from there, we have a lot of rural, almost frontier sort of communities. And so somebody was talking to me about who I needed to chat with. And they were saying, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so because he has a lot of perspective on not only the healthcare systems, but the criminal justice systems there too. And I thought, that's interesting. And they said, well, because he's the town doctor and the town judge. And I thought, that doesn't happen in Houston, Texas. Because we know what works for the Permian Basin isn't going to work well in Dallas. What works in El Paso will never make it off the ground in Austin, Texas. And so all the decisions that are made about our local systems have to be informed by our local leaders and the people who are living and existing within those systems so that their unique needs can be met in unique ways. And so our job is to help those local systems have relationships with their state regulators so that that progress and change could be made in a tailored way to each community. Our guiding principle at the Institute is that the traditional approach of treating the mind and the body separately has led to inadequate and inappropriate care, oftentimes for people with mental illness and substance use disorders. We know that people need to be treated holistically and not like, a magician's assistant with the head over here and the body over there. Because, even prior to the pandemic, mental health and substance use rates were rising for our youth and for our adults. And now, underlying indicators of depression are 3 times the pre-pandemic baseline. 1/5 of Americans are affected. The number of people seriously considering suicide has doubled. I think most disturbingly is that the rate of pediatric emergency department visits for suicide has doubled since pre-pandemic levels. And the highest rate increase is in our adolescent girls. I don't know about y'all, but I have a 12-year-old daughter in junior high, so that number terrifies me. We know that half of mental health conditions manifest by age 14, and that by young adulthood, 75% of cases have presented. And so a major contributor to this mental health crisis is that we do not detect or treat until 8 to 10 years after symptoms emerge. I'm going to say that again, 8 to 10 years after symptoms emerge. We wait until the suffering has become visible, usually in the form of a crisis. So let's think about that. If a woman found a lump in her breast today and we waited 8 to 10 years to detect that or treat that, imagine what the outcome is for that. And so that's why we have to bolster around mental health and support those in our communities, in our homes, in our families, and our friends who are living with, fighting, and trying to recover from mental illness the exact same way that many years ago we did for breast cancer. Because nationally, 17.3 million adults experience a major depressive episode, 40 million an anxiety disorder each year. There are 1.5 or more Texans, our family, y'all, your mama and daddy, my sister and brother, our best friends, 1.5 million Texans who are suffering with depressive disorders each year. And of that 1.5 million, only 47% are detected, not even half. Of the 47% that are detected, only 24% are getting treatment, and of that, only 9% are getting adequate treatment. And of all those numbers, this is the worst, only 6% are reaching remission. Those are staggering, terrifying numbers to me. And the thing is that we know in every other physical illness that identifying early, treating aggressively, creates a situation where the symptoms or the experience is less severe, more easily treatable, and it prevents that illness from becoming a more complex disorder. Okay, so we've talked about all the scary statistics, and we know that there's all these numbers, and there's people out there somewhere, that are these numbers, right? But the problem with statistics is that they seem really removed from us. We don't know those people. That's a number. Well, what happens when we know someone who might be one of those numbers? And that's what we're going to talk about today. The first thing we need to do is talk about mental health sort of in a general way. And that's that I need you to understand that mental health is not a fixed state. It's a continuum. And so you can go from excelling to thriving to surviving to struggling to in crisis and back again. Mental health issues don't mean you have a mental illness. You may have testing anxiety, but that doesn't mean that you need medication. I have, like I said, a 12-year-old daughter, and if she gets a bad grade on something, she gets very, very, what you would think is anxious. But what I've taught her is that she just needs some self-talk, some deep breathing. You know, I made 100 on this and a 90 on this, therefore I'm not, an idiot. You have to train your brain, that sort of thing, but it doesn't require a diagnosis for her. It doesn't require an intervention. So how do we know when someone does need an intervention? Well, what we look at is frequency, intensity, and duration. So how many times are these feelings happening in a given amount of time, in a certain period? Are you feeling persistently sad more days than not? The intensity, how strong is it? Is it that, you have these feelings of kind of feeling down every now and then, or are you having trouble getting out of bed? Are you having the experience that the things that you loved, your friend groups, the local bowling league, I don't know, whatever it is you do for fun, that no longer brings you joy? Because that's a big, big indicator of depression. And what about the duration? How long is this going on? For depression, we're looking usually at about, if this is persistent for 2 weeks, we're going to start looking in the disorder area. And we take all those things, the frequency, the intensity, the duration, and then we start talking about how is this affecting the person's functioning. So are you seeing somebody who, was kind of seemed a little bit down every now and then, but is now having a hard time making it to work, can't seem to concentrate? Those sort of things are what you're going to notice in somebody that we need to start looking at interventions at that point. So all those things, right? Thinking about medication and how you get diagnosed and all these sorts of things are really, really important. But I want to tell you that before I started at the Institute, I've been there for about 7 years, I told you, I had about 20 years in community services, community treatment, so I was actually treating patients. And I was treating folks with serious mental illness, so we're talking about major depression, really severe mood disorders, schizophrenia spectrum, PTSD, all those sorts of things. Very, very complex. They had co-occurring substance use disorders, complex medical issues. Most of them were homeless, so really complicated cases. And so I knew, of course, we have to consider their medication. We have to think about what treatment modality is most important to treat their traumas, connecting them to community resources like housing and these sorts of things. They're so important. But the one thing I learned that I think is the most important over all those years was that the most important part of getting them to the point of treatment was connection. It was caring about them and building a relationship so they trusted me enough to provide that treatment. I had mainly young clinicians on my team because frankly, they're the ones that are still spirited and willing to work with really, really hard patients. And they wanted to do everything by the book. And so if there was a manual, they wanted to follow it intervention by intervention, step by step. But I think the most important thing that I taught them was that if you found someone in a ditch, disabled, unable to get up, you wouldn't stand over them and read from a manual telling them how to get out of the ditch. You would reach your hand out, human to human. Are you okay? What's going on? How can I help you? And you would help them up to safety. You would help them up to health. You would walk with them to hope. And so that's what I'm going to tell you today, is that the most important thing is that first step, that connection. Quit minding your own business. And so what you do is you show up, you ask the questions, and you do it fearlessly because for some reason, for so many years, we've believed that mental health is something outside the person, that it's a behavior and a choice, and that it's something to be shameful and fixed. But it isn't. Recently, I was on a panel, actually a little while ago, and a woman asked, and of course, I understand, but she asked me, how do we convince women to become more vulnerable in sharing their mental health issues with their primary care doctor? And I said, well, first we stop telling them they're being vulnerable by sharing their mental health issues. Because the last time I checked, y'all, our brains are in our bodies. So mental health care is health care. And the more we start to recognize that, the more the conversation changes. If you saw someone limping, if you saw your friend limping, your sister, whoever, you would say, oh my goodness, what happened? Can I help you? Can I get you to a doctor? And you wouldn't think twice about asking about that. We have to control our fears about these conversations by thinking of them as physical health. We have to start normalizing this. Like we talked about breast cancer, if your friend suspected she had a lump, if she said, oh, I think I felt a little something, you wouldn't turn your head and ignore it because it's uncomfortable to talk about breast. You would get her in a car to the doctor immediately. You wouldn't let her languish. You wouldn't let her wait because it's something uncomfortable to talk about. There is no time when it comes to mental health, just like there is no time when it comes to any other physical illness that needs treatment. So just like any other illness, like we talked about, we can't wait to identify this, because the more we wait to identify it, the more suffering occurs. As uncomfortable as you feel asking about it, remember, when you feel that feeling, if you're concerned about somebody, imagine what they're feeling in that time that you're wasting. And the illness progresses. It gets worse the longer we wait. And in depression, the suffering can lead to death by depression, which we know as suicide. So we ask the questions. What do? You ask the questions. If you're worried about it, come with a list of the resources you want to provide. Have a plan in place before you talk about what you're willing to do for them. So if the answer is yes, I need help, or no, I'm not okay, you have the plan that, okay, let's call your doctor right now, your primary care physician, and let's make an appointment, and I'll go with you. And you be there completely in presence with them, because this is big stuff to talk about, just like any other chronic, scary illnesses. And then you follow up continuously. Hey, I know you had that appointment. You want to go for a walk? What did they tell you? What are you going to do? What's the treatment plan? And you support them just like you do in every other aspect of their lives. So we talked about the worst outcome is suicide. So what are the warning signs? And these are things, guys, that you've heard your whole life, I'm sure. I'm probably not telling you anything new, but it's something to remember because they don't change. It's something to remember. If you have somebody who's talking about death, even super vaguely, like that is what we need to be looking at. There may be someone who says, I am really considering killing myself. It would surprise me, but if they told you that, great, we know what to do. But things like, my husband and I aren't getting along at all. I don't know how this is going to end. It would be easier if I just didn't wake up tomorrow. We don't ignore those things. What do you mean by that is what you ask. Because any sort of mention of that, our finances are out of control. I don't think we're ever going to get out of debt. My family would just be better off if I weren't here. So they're not saying, it'd be better off if I killed myself. But they're thinking about not existing in a very close social connection. Those are the kind of things that you immediately ask, what did you mean by that? And you say, are you okay? Have you thought about that? The next thing is the means to end their life. We're in Texas, y'all, and there are guns all around. I could tell you how many are in my house right now. Lethal means in the house. If you are worried about somebody, that is something you have to talk about. And if you know that they've been thinking about it, offer to take them out for a little while. Do you know people are stockpiling pills? Maybe they're using a lot of sleeping medication lately, those sort of things. These are things that we need to talk to each other about. One of the biggest things, withdrawing from social groups. I see all of y'all chatting and friendly. If you have someone in here that starts withdrawing from that a little bit, that's probably a good time to check in. If you have your bowling leagues or your bunco nights or whatever it is, golf games, whatever it is that you're doing, and somebody just stops coming, it's time to reach out. And then perhaps there's extreme mood swings. On the other side of that, if you have somebody, we've got to get everybody together, I'm so excited, let's start a bowling league, and da-da-da-da, and just can't wait, all these sorts of things, and then all of a sudden is not responding, is not interested in that bowling league, these big mood swings are things that we also have to consider. The feeling trapped or hopeless, just like we talked about, finances, relationships, work, and the increased use of alcohol. I think a lot of people saw that during the pandemic, but I can tell you that 50% of suicides had alcohol involved in the general population. So if you're seeing a big change in that, especially in drugs or alcohol, that's something to really touch base about. If you're seeing more risky behaviors, so somebody is, recklessly driving a lot or uncontrolled rage, these are all signs. And then a big one that I'm sure you're aware of, but you start having somebody telling you goodbye in a way that feels different, that's a big indicator. It doesn't seem like they're saying, see you tomorrow, see you next week. It's goodbye. Take that moment to have a conversation. So what are the interventions for that? They're really similar to what we talked about. You ask the question. Because studies show that asking at-risk individuals if they're considering suicide, if they are suicidal, does not increase suicides or suicidal thoughts. I'm going to say that again because that is something that is very generally, people are really scared about that. If I mention it, will they go do it? What if they weren't thinking about it and now I'm making them think about it? Research shows that is not the case. If you have any concern, you ask the question. You keep them safe. If they tell you, yeah, I've been thinking about it, you figure out about the lethal means, about any sort of pills, keep them in a safe space, you be there. Research suggests that acknowledging and talking about suicide may reduce suicidal thoughts. So not only does it not push somebody toward it, it actually reduces it. Of course, help them connect. I was talking about the resources. I I told the ladies earlier at Centers, I have a stack this big that I was going to give you of 4 pages worth of resources that I left on my kitchen table. But I'm going to send that out to her. So, when you have these talks, that you have something that you can take with you. And then stay connected, like we talked about. Studies have shown the number of suicide deaths go down when someone follows up with a person that was at risk. So you've already had the conversation, things seem better, keep following up with that person. Now, I'm coming to a closing, but there's something I have to say, and I cannot leave without telling you this, because I've been sitting here telling you what you're responsible for, what you need to do, how you take care of these people, and that is important. And I do personally believe, I'm not saying this on behalf of the Institute, I do believe it is our responsibility when we see someone or feel something off that we ask those questions. I do believe that is our responsibility. And it's our responsibility to support them. It is our responsibility to give them resources and connect them and do everything we can. But I need you all to understand, we are not in control of what they decide to do. We are not in control of those actions, and you cannot be in control of the outcome of those actions. So you do everything you can, but know that ultimately we each decide if we're going to improve our mental health, if we're going to stay and be here with everyone. So I have to say that to you. I also can't leave without standing on my soapbox, and I'm sure you're thinking, oh goodness, that wasn't your soapbox? This is terrifying now, right? Okay. So one of the things that I think is really important, and I kind of mentioned this, is that we change the way we talk about mental health. As I said, mental health care is physical health care. But we've been talking about what do we do if this is happening, if we recognize someone who needs help, what are the interventions? But let's talk about how we get ahead of that game. And I think one of the most important things is the way that we talk about mental health and normalizing it as it's a physical health care just, among us, but something that's really important is the way that we talk to our children about mental health. And I am seeing a change in that. I see it among my daughter's friends, so I think that we're pushing the needle on that. But we need to start talking to them about the difference between emotions and emotional reaction. Because I don't know about y'all, but I got told a lot, stop crying, and, it's okay, a lot of that stuff. Emotions are completely natural. Emotions are our brain's data for how we sort of react to the world around us and the relationships that we make, or the relationships, even more importantly, we don't make. And so what we have to teach our children is that it is okay to be mad, 100%, that's okay. It is not okay to hit or yell or anything like that. It is absolutely all right to be sad. It is good to cry. It is not all right to lay on the ground and kick your legs and scream. It is wonderful to be excited and happy. In the airport, when you see airplanes, not okay to run around screaming. And those are two very different things. And so when we talk to our kids about having those emotions, then they grow up believing that that's okay. And they will have processed it, and they will have, moved that sort of energy out of them in a healthy way. And we have to start asking our kids open-ended questions about how they are experiencing these emotions. So not, how was your day at school? Good. Did you have a good day? Yes, no. But rather, was there anybody that annoyed you today? That sort of thing. Yeah. Well, what did you do? I did this, that, and the other. Well, how did you feel when you did that? Well, I felt like this. Well, how did the person receive that? Well, what do you think they experienced that as? Would you have done something differently? And so it doesn't look like you're talking to them about feelings and that sort of thing if you don't want to put it in that frame. But we have to give them a better chance than probably most of us had. And we have to start creating it as if it's okay to talk about that stuff, because then they will go to their doctor as if it is a lump in their breast, as if it is a broken leg, whatever it is. And that is how we start moving our kids and ourselves into health. I am extremely grateful to have been here with y'all today. I have to tell you, I work across the state of Texas. I see the impact all over our communities for mental health, and to be in a room where people are thinking about how to approach this differently, how to support the people in their communities. I can't tell you what that means to me personally in the Institute as well. Because now you all are going to be a disruptive force and be able to go out there and change the way that people think and access care, and for that I am extremely grateful. So thank y'all so much for this.
Dr. Mathias, thank you. Can you give her another round of applause, please? As our panelists begin to make their way up here on the stage for our conversation, I want to just take a moment and talk about our partnership with our friends at Centers. Mental health has been something we've talked about since right after the mobile mass shooting that's happened here. And we had a woman in the community that wanted to reach out and start a conversation, and we did these on Facebook. These extended not only past that to get us through that particular issue, but we continue to do that. And one day a week, they partner with us and come on during our 4 o'clock broadcast, and we talk about various topics. We talk about mental health. We talk about things that our children are concerned with, things that are going on in our communities. And so this has been an open dialogue, and it's a great partnership, and thank you for continuing to do that, because I know we're helping a lot of people, and that's the best part. We are going to have a panel of experts here, and I'm going to introduce them all, and then we're going to start a conversation. We also want to leave some time if you have questions for our panelists. We will allow you to do so. Let me first start. I'll do these in order. Mark McQueen is a licensed professional counselor, supervisor, and clinical director of Centers. Will you wave so they know it's you? Joy Blavelt. She is a licensed professional counselor at Centers. Did I say that right? Is it bad? I was worried about pronouncing her name. Joy, thank you. Lisa McGee is a licensed master social worker, qualified mental health professional in community services, and licensed mental health intake clinician at Midland Health, Midland Memorial Hospital in Midland. Dr. Mohammed Saad is a child and adolescent psychiatry fellow at Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center. And on the end, Dr. Amanda Mathias is with us as well. Thank you. Mark, I'm going to start with you. So we listened to Dr. Mathias's overview of what it took to determine an impending crisis. What is your method as a therapist in establishing a level of existence of a mental health crisis?
So one of the
may have to turn that on.
that would be a good thing to know how to do.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Go ahead and warm up.
All right, is that on now?
It is.
Okay. I should have checked that before I started talking. So one of the things I heard Dr. Mathias say was that we need to be relentless in the way we ask questions. And one thing I would add to that is one of the things I have noticed in clients who have been in my office after doing this for a lot of years is very few talk about suicidal thoughts without me asking directly. Very few come in with the inclination to share that without a direct question being asked. And so I can't encourage people enough to be very, very targeted with their questions. Our tendency is to stop with, "Are you okay? Is there something you need to talk about?" And I would encourage us to be even bolder than that. Don't be afraid to speak specifically about what you see. If you notice them drinking more, if you notice them being irritable and frustrated with things that do not normally make them frustrated, if you notice them pulling away from activities that they have typically been a part of, I agree with Dr. Mathias completely that my questions about mental health crisis or suicide have never made their situation worse. It has only led to them talking more. So we can't be bold enough, in my opinion, in terms of how direct we are with those questions. What I hope that we're moving to, and this is what I was sitting here thinking as you were talking, Dr. Mathias. I was thinking about the topic of sex in our home with my boys as they were growing up, and how difficult that conversation was if I waited until there was a serious conversation about sex that needed to happen. If that were a comfortable conversation and something that we had done just on a routine basis when something presented itself, when it came time for a serious conversation about that topic, it was much easier for my wife and myself and for my boys to engage in. And I think the same is true with mental health. If we can work our way to where we're talking about mental health routinely and not just when a crisis happens, it is much easier to find the words and the comfort level with talking about the crisis point if it's part of our everyday conversation.
But don't you think we have trouble how to actually bring that up in front of our children? I mean, to be point on with some of those issues you just talked about?
Point on with just mental health in general?
Well, mental health, or even, you were talking about suicide, you're talking about other topics there. Sometimes don't you think we as parents fear that we're going to ask something and irritate, or you understand what I'm saying? It's that having that conversation that's the tough part.
I think maybe I do, but I don't think I'm unique in this in parenting. I tend to worry about my children's response. I don't want to shut them down. I don't really like it when they roll their eyes at me. I want them to like me. But the reality is I know that they need to have those conversations. So talking about little moments of frustration or little moments of anger, or when I see them being insecure and speaking that directly and making that a comfortable conversation, even though I still get an occasional eye roll, is a good thing.
That's a good thing, is what you're saying.
Yes, I think so.
Okay. Panelists, anyone want to chime in on that as well? Well, let's hand this mic too, since we have one. We can pass this along in case you all want to use this, either one of you. Don't be afraid. It's just a microphone. That way we can hear you. So, Dr. Mathias, do you want to add anything to that, or do you, as far as, again, having that conversation?
Hello? Oh, it's on.
Dr. Saad, go ahead, yes.
All right. The one thing I would highlight is talk. Very important. Talk to the child, talk to the patient, talk to the parents, talk people around us, talk to them. If we see any difference in their, like I think earlier we discussed about warning signs, like if our kid is withdrawing, it looks more irritable to us, kind of like not participating in the hobbies. These are the warning signs that we can look into our kids or people around us and then talk to them. Is there something that we can talk to you about? So this is what I do. I'm a child psychiatry fellow. I'm a trainee right now. And when a patient comes to my door, the patient does not know me. He never seen me before. I look completely different, right? I do not share the same background. Lot of differences, right? But when I ask them, what's going wrong? Do you mind sharing some things with me? And then sometimes they open up. Yesterday, a patient cried in front of me, a young kid, right? Just cried. And what was going wrong? Nothing. He was coming from a well-to-do family, very nice parents, but he seems like no one listens to him. And I was the first one who asked him what's going wrong. So I did not do anything major with the patient. I did not give him any medication. There was no need of medication. There was someone who could talk to the patient, talk to the kid, talk to the adult. When we get older, we do not have people surrounding us, right? A lot of life changes happen to us, and those GERD patients or those adults, they come and they just want to be heard. They just want to be listened. If you provide those values, if you listen to them, just provide those ears to them, a lot of problem just goes away. In my little experience that I have, so I feel like talking to the people. Now, how should we talk that the other person feel heard? Right? Parents do talk to their kids. Who does not talk to their kids, right? But how to talk to them when they feel like they've been heard? These kids are going through a lot of stresses nowadays, especially the adolescent kids. Social media is playing a huge role. I think when I was growing up, I did not have social media until I was 17 or 18. I was an adolescent, right? A lot of these kids have been exposed to social media when they're like now 6 years old, even 5 years old, putting their videos on TikTok. They have this body image, and they are just like, 9 years old female, having a certain body image they want to, and if they do not have that, they feel depressed. They feel withdrawn, right? So I just feel like there's a huge gap between the way we were raised and the way these kids are raised. Someone has to play a role to educate ourselves to kind of minimize the gap, and we do not expect our children to minimize the gap. We need to take that step. Like, we need to educate ourselves. Just on a different note, unfortunately, I've been working in this community for the last 1.5 years, and I'm seeing a lot of kids who've been raised by their grandparents. Okay, XYZ issues, parents are taken out of the home, they're not alive, or there are a lot of things going on, and they've been put out with the grandparents, and grandparents have been raised in a very different way, right? And now they're expecting their kids to raise 8 years old, like, why is he not listening to me? They want to discipline the same way that they were disciplined. And this is a huge, huge crisis. It's very hard when we had that conversation with the grandparents and with the kids, because if you tell them, okay, there are some parenting classes, they would not like to hear that word from you coming, okay, parenting classes. What do you mean? I mean, I have raised kids older than you, right? I mean, you're telling me about parenting classes? But this is reality, right? And the kids are suffering, they are crying inside, and someone just to hear them. And when you hear them, you'll get a lot of stories out of them, and you will find a way to help them. Thank you.
I know a lot of us say we're glad there wasn't social media at all when we were growing up. That's a whole nother discussion. Lisa joins us. Lisa McGee, explain, if you can, the role of a mental health evaluator, and walk us through the process once a patient is admitted for crisis intervention or evaluation, and then what the next steps of care and so forth.
Okay, sure. So when someone comes to Midland Memorial Hospital and they are in crisis, our crisis evaluator is notified. After that person has been medically cleared through lab work and by the medical professional, then a full crisis assessment is completed by a mental health evaluator. At that time, decisions are made if that person needs to go inpatient to a psychiatric facility, or if they're able to go home with some supports. Either way, whether they go home or they go inpatient, our team follows up with them to try to continue to connect them to further resources, make sure they're getting those counseling appointments or seeing a psychiatrist, and sometimes that includes just being a listening ear and trying to do some solution-focused guidance. While they are in the hospital, our team coordinates with other staff members of the hospital just to ensure that person's safety while they're there.
Is there an option to return them home too? Is that part of that too?
It depends on how the assessment goes, but yes, that could be an option, depending on what the crisis is and what kind of supports are available.
Thank you. Give her a round of applause, please. Thank you. Once again, if you have other questions, we'll give a chance for you to do that here in just a minute. Dr. Saad, I'm going to go back to you, please. If you could explain the role of a hospital scenario during a mental health crisis and how you work with the mental health evaluator.
So we are working in a collaborative care system where all component of healthcare is very crucial, including nurses, mental health evaluator, and then doctors. So Texas Tech Psychiatry is in partnership with MMH Hospital, and we as a trainee, we usually go to the hospital when we receive a call, depending on what part of the hospital. Is it a flow? Is it coming from the ER? Let's say take a scenario of the ER. We receive a call for example, a 16-year-old female coming with suicidal ideation, and we received a call. Dr. Jane is the head doctor. I work under him. He received that call, and we go and check to the patient. Mental health evaluator at that point are already there, and they're doing their psychosocial assessment, and we also play a part and we do our own psychosocial assessments. At that point, it's like a team working together. From that point onwards, we're doing our assessment, and then we think about, let's say this patient is an imminent threat to herself or to the people around them, right? Now we need to think about whether if it's an imminent threat, then the patient qualifies to be involuntarily hospitalized. We don't want to involuntarily hospitalize anyone, right? So especially with the adolescent, we need parents on board, and we get that voluntary, they allow us, then we can voluntarily hospitalize the patient. If not, in some cases, we need to go to a court or judge and then get EDO, which is called emergency detention order, and keep the patient in the hospital. If according to Texas law, if they qualify with imminent threat, safety to themselves or anyone else. Now, this patient is hospitalized. Now, should we keep the patient in the hospital or should we send the patient to a psychiatric facility in the area? And that's the decision that we make collectively with the mental health evaluator on board, other doctors and the parents, right, to get a whole picture of the patient. So that's a decision that we make, which is called a management plan. Now, in some cases, kids are there or adult or their patient is there, let's say, and they're okay, they can be safe to go home. They said something which they did not mean it, and you do the whole assessment based on the past history, based on the collaborative care, whether the patient was under the influence or not. You make the whole assessment, and if they're safe to go home, now a safety plan comes into role. You call their parents, you need to find a safe place, you need to arrange a transportation, you need to make sure there's no gun or weapon at home. If they are locked. So all those comes into a role when we are making that decision as a doctor. Thank
You're
you.
speaking more on an extreme mental health crisis, right? That's
Yes, like when it's an imminent threat. When it's like simple, a lot of times just patient comes to the hospital and they were having an argument with their parent and they make those threats. We do not take any threat lightly. So we need to look at the whole picture, like, okay, if she or he said something to the parent, what was the intensity? There's a whole scale called Columbia Suicide Severity Scale. We do that based on the intensity of the threat, frequency of the threat, past history, any other mental illness, was under the influence. Like sometimes I have a kid who basically, mom does not know about the past suicide attempt. This kid was found to have a lot of pills in her cabinet or closet, right? Piling up on the pills. Mom kind of like found out there was a lot of piles up, so she was like, okay, what's going on? And they brought the patient to the outpatient clinic, and we were during the discussion, found out that she did try to kill herself 2 times in the past. Now, not to the point where she could be admitted, but if someone uses a sharp blade and put a cut on the arms with an aim of killing herself, that's called suicide attempt. Whether the cut was intense, deeper or not, that does not mean. But it can be counted as a suicide attempt if the intention was to kill herself. If the intention was to harm themselves, that's called self-harm behavior. It's a separate thing. But if the intention was to kill themselves, you call it a suicide attempt. If someone takes 2 pills of Tylenol with an aim of killing herself or himself, it's a suicide attempt. So we would find out like the patient has done suicide attempt in the past few times. This was like her 3rd or 4th time, and she has those ideation, and now mom is like, no, I can keep the patient at home, and of course, but can you keep track of the patient 24/7, and with that history? So something which is very normal and okay, but during the assessment you figure out, no, it's a danger, and then you'll have to make the decision. Thank you.
There's more to it, yeah. Thank you. Joy is with us. We're going to talk about these mental health and the kind of things he brought up are pretty frightening that he's talking about. So let's talk about that. Very frightening for parents. Mom and dad express concern of their child. What do you recommend in terms of any signs of concern?
Okay. I feel like the preacher that everybody before him has read the scripture that he was going to read. So when you're talking to a parent, you want to make sure that they're communicating with their kids, because the signs, the list that we have, you can Google any of those things and get those lists and check them off. But sometimes kids, more introverted kids that stay to themselves, the connection and the communication is really important, because they're not just going to have as many open symptoms as a more outgoing, expressive child. Sometimes that changes in crisis. They might become more talkative. But definitely the connection and knowing your child. And so that way you can, some of the things we're talking about, you can tell when those changes are coming. Like withdrawal from social engagements, or not hanging out with the same friends, changing friendships, maybe friends that are want to have riskier behavior, skipping class, or staying out later than they're supposed to, or driving faster than they're supposed to, for teenagers especially. For younger kids and infants, a lot of times regression, if they're sucking their thumb when they've not done that, or they're able to dress themselves and then they want some help, that security level is not there. You kind of pick up on some insecurities. Then also any aggression or the mood swings that they were talking about, over talking or being quieter, maybe less eating or overeating, the fluctuation in that, the sleep. They talk about, they can't sleep, they can sleep for a little while, but then they're awake for a long extended period of time. And even their energy levels, where maybe they were playing on the basketball team or volleyball or something, and then all of a sudden they don't have the motivation or the energy to go and participate in those activities anymore. There's some kids that they withdraw so much, they don't want to go to school. They'll say, I don't want to go to school, my stomach hurts, I don't want it. Kids, a lot of times the younger they are, they talk about the stomach, and I like that, she was talking about being holistic. Sometimes there's a physical complaint when it's actually a mental health issue, like I'm having headaches, I'm having migraines, things like that. And so you want to look into those, especially if your child's complaining, weekly or multiple times a week or something like that. Those are signs that your child is going through something. They're having some kind of anxiety, and so you want to keep check with your communication, and not necessarily always have a certain checklist, but know your child, and if something is changing, know something's going on.
Let me ask this too, and any one of you all can chime in on this, but the issue we're seeing here a lot of, and Mark, I know you've seen this as well, I'm sure, but our schools are crowded. I know this is going to be a question somebody's going to ask. We're having a lot of people making threats. This is a big issue, making threats, and so that faces a charge. I'm going to shoot up the school. I'm going to do that. This is a big trend that's happening now. So how do we have that conversation with our kids about something like that? Would somebody want to address that, perhaps?
Well, I would say one thing we need to realize first is that violence is not mental illness, and that there are probably 10,000 children in Texas that would meet diagnostically, clinically, sort of the characteristics of some of the children who have committed these crimes. But what we have to do is to have conversations way ahead and start recognizing these physical symptoms, especially, as possible mental health symptoms. And I may not be answering your question, but basically what I'm saying is, you can't necessarily prevent violence, but you can help people get connected to care early on when you start seeing symptomology, and it comes back to that whole thing, see something, say something, all of that, and that includes with mental health. And so I think we have to quit equating those two, because they aren't the same thing, even if it existed in the violence. And so I'd just put it that way.
Okay. Aside from that, times have changed, so there's a lot of stress for kids. So again, this kind of falls into that, because perhaps there's something going on that's leading them to that. That was kind of my question.
Of course, it could be a possibility that I've seen a kid, I just kind of recall it, a lot of bullying was involved at school, and he does not really mean to hurt anyone, but it was like a frustration, anger, that he said that. Now, no one can predict for sure if he's going to do it or not. But at that point, we need to look at the whole picture, how he came to that point and saying those words. What is going in the house? If in the house, parents are the model for the kids, and I'm just going to go back to that part. If parents are angry and they're making those things and saying those things loud at home, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to say you, I'm going to throw things at home. Kids would do the same thing when he's out of frustration, which is called modeling. So you look at the picture at the home, how things are at home, how are things at school. Now this kid have told the principal and told the authorities multiple times that I've been bullied and the school has done nothing. Do you think this is justified, his anger is justified? Yes or no? We can answer that question to ourselves, right? That he has tried, he did ask for help to his parents, who were not available to listen to him, he did tell to the teachers who could not do much about it, and then out of frustration he said that. And then when he said it, he's like, no, I don't really mean it. I just said it out of anger, and there's no history and nothing, no violence before. You will keep an eye on the kid, but it's kind of like assessment that, okay, this does not really mean. Now I have another kid who has been hearing voices, and a lot of his drawings were very violent. So you can see drawing images, and he brought a whole pile of his drawings to me, and I was looking, and there were stories which were very violent. He was a kid who has been, parents were not at home, and he was, I think, has exposure to drugs in utero. So there were a lot of chemical, exposure when he was infant. And having those violent images, and then hearing and listening to voices, those put me in a different category than a first case, and I would be more careful that this kid might do something, and I need to really start him on a medication or put a safety plan for him, like things locked out in the house, parents should be involved, there should be therapy for the patient. So again, every picture is different, and I always go back to where it all started. Like if you look at right at that point, things will look different. But if you go back, what happened when he was young, what happened when he was born, what happened from that point onwards to now, that's the whole thing will give you a very different idea of the patient and how he'd get there. So I don't think I hope I answered the question, but I just want to add more things to it, something that we can think about. Thank you.
Your question about what's going on in the schools and the increase in violence, one of the things I hope we can shift towards is that there's, again, more preventative, and there are things we can do as parents and as families and friends to promote good mental health in our children rather than just responding well to crisis. And it's easy to get, in my opinion, to get stuck on some important things in parenting, like how you act when you're in public and setting the right consequence when they misbehave. But there's some skills I think we miss that are partially behind some of these examples you're talking about. I don't know that we spend quite enough time helping our children develop the skill of empathy, the skill of proper relationship development, the skill of resilience, that we don't model frustration tolerance the way we should as parents and as friends, and it's easy to hear some of those things that go on in Hope and hear a presentation like today and walk out and you hear these checklists, and we're going to go talk to the next person we talk to. You're going to think they're in a mental health crisis because they are going to meet something on that checklist that you just heard us talk about. And there is a difference between a bad day and a mental health crisis. But I think there is hope in this message too, that there are some skills, especially in our homes, that we can teach, like the empathy and resilience and frustration tolerance, and how to develop a relationship properly, and how to see something from someone else's perspective, even if you don't agree. And I think those tend to get lost, but are simple solutions to help promote us away from some of these examples you're talking about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Do we want to open this up to the public now? Do we want to ask if anyone has questions you'd like to ask our panelists? We've got a little bit of time. If we would, okay.
Okay.
You're gonna have to walk, Melanie. Sorry.
Hold on, just.
Hang on. We're gonna get a mic to you. That way everybody can hear you.
Okay, so one of my questions when Dr. Mathias, sorry if I said that incorrectly, when you were talking, if we have a loved one or somebody that we know that's, having suicidal ideations, and we ask them questions, we bring up these topics and have conversations with them. You said that it doesn't increase their rates. So my thing is like, if I wanted to ask somebody, hey, how are you feeling? Or, are you having any of these thoughts? Because we know like that they've already been down this road. What other conversations about this topic could you have, other than just asking them if they're okay or if they're having those thoughts again?
Right. Nope. Sorry about, okay. So one of the things that we found, and I can't remember the percentage, people who we've looked at if you share your own experiences seems to help those conversations. So being able to say, hey, I noticed you're a little different because XYZ, whatever the action is, and saying, I know that, when I've been in XYZ situation, I experience this. Sometimes, my feeling is this, and any sort of actions you've taken, that's something that's really helpful. So being able to identify with someone else, because I think when people are going through especially depression and anxiety, all these sorts of things, you feel like you're alone in it. And so being able to build that sort of communication is helpful. So if you have the ability to talk about experiences, whether, if you are like, well, I have perfect health and I'm completely stable. I can't say that myself, but, I've shown you that today, I think. But that you be able to connect in that way. In this situation, when I'm stressed, I've experienced this and I've noticed you're kind of da-da-da. I wanted to see how you're feeling. I think that that's a really good way to start a conversation, is sharing your own sort of stories with folks. So that's one of the things that I would recommend. Does that answer at all what you're asking? Okay.
Hi. So my question, sorry, I'll be standing. I have a couple of questions, and the first one will be, can one evaluation actually give you a good assessment of a patient or a person who has a mental issues or mental health problems?
So if I understand correct, like a mental health evaluation can give us the whole picture. That's what the question is?
Yeah, if just one evaluation. I don't know how you do it, but yeah.
Oh,
I'm just asking, yeah.
Not always. I would say that you'll have to, like, the first evaluation will give you a little bit picture of should we keep the patient there to assess more, right? A lot of time the patients are guarded. They do not want to share anything to you. And you are seeing that, so the collaterals are very important, like who the patient came with, like the parents or the teachers or the neighbor, right? What actually happened? Like he was found collapsed at home and there were like drug pills next to him, and when you see the patient, he was not conscious. The first evaluation will not give you a lot more. Then you'll have to reassess the patient again and see. And sometimes, like, your first diagnosis would be completely different than your second diagnosis. Like, you were thinking about something else, and when you reassess the patient after 2 or 3 days, you might change your diagnosis. So not always the first evaluation will give you the whole picture.
I want to add to that. For anybody who, you yourself are experiencing mental health issues or you're seeking treatment, he's absolutely right. Sometimes it takes a little while to figure out exactly what's needed. That's why it's so important to stick with treatment, to stick with medication, so that your psychiatrist or your primary care physician or whoever you're receiving treatment from is able to adjust those things. And also, a lot of times people will start feeling a lot better once they take medication and think that they don't need it. That means it's working and you're supposed to feel better. And so sticking with that treatment, making sure you're having conversations with your physician about those sort of changes and symptoms or side effects and all those things is really, really important to stabilizing your mental health.
Okay. Another question, if you don't mind. I was going to ask you, how do you involve spiritual health care in mental health? I don't know if you all use it in your institutions or organizations, but I think it's an important part of mental health as well.
Yeah, so a lot of studies have shown that faith is a protective factor. So having faith, whoever you believe in, supernatural being, having a faith is a protective factor for suicide. So it's spiritual if something goes along with your belief, praying to God, right? And it helps you calm down and your therapist is willing to work with that. That's a great help. Like any kind of professional help should be there. Now, if someone is having a psychosis, right, seeing visions of demons or seeing visions of, Jesus. I have a patient who was like seeing, and then he was kind of confused between, I'm seeing blood and I'm also seeing like demons, I'm seeing Jesus. Now for that, and the patient actually went to his faith healer because he was thinking that my priest would help me to help this figure out, but And he took the medication for a while. He felt better to a point where he could understand that this is not correct, and he went to the faith healer. I don't know what happened. I saw that kid after 2 or 3 months. He stopped the medication, full-blown psychosis. Now, do you think spiritual help would help him? Probably yes, but there should be other managed like medication or something also on board with that. But in some minor cases, depression, some minor anxiety, and there are professions who provide the spiritual health. It just varies from case to case, and it can help definitely because faith is a protective factor for a lot of people. Yeah, thank you. And then,
Maybe one more question.
Dr. Mathias, you talked about normalizing mental health care, and I'm just curious for us and all the different communities we're in, outside of just asking if someone's okay when we notice things are wrong, what other ways can we do that work of normalizing mental health care in the communities that we exist in on a daily basis?
So I don't know if this is going to answer exactly, but one of the things I think is really encouraging people to get treatment in primary care, mild to moderate disorders can be treated there so that these specialty services like psychiatry and therapy, all those sorts of things can kind of open up access for folks with more severe needs. So I think the first thing is really starting to talk to people about if you notice things, hey, go see your primary care physician and seeking treatment there. And I think just talking about it. So this is not very ladylike, and I almost said it earlier and then I decided not to, but now I'm going to tell you. So there's an organization that's a veteran suicide prevention organization, and I'm not going to say the word, but I think it's the best name of an organization I've ever heard, and it's called Just Effing Ask. And they say the word in it. You can go on their website and everything. But I think that that's exactly it. I think it's just effing ask, just talk about it. I think that's what it is if you want to go out and be a part of this conversation, is to be able to talk about it like physical health care, and being in those conversations and leading those conversations. We have what's called Okay to Say is a campaign through my organization. It's on the list I was going to bring you. If you want to look at that, that's talking about, it's okay to not be okay, to say that. I think that it's bringing those sort of conversations. You asked about faith and mental health. A couple years ago, I was over a project with the HEB, now I'm saying F all the time, the HEB Family Foundation, and they did a study on faith and mental health. And what I found was really interesting was that congregations are really open to getting resources, but what's really important to them is not taking God out of that. And so I'm happy to share with you information about, there's lots of different sort of models that have been implemented across the United States and in Texas that are doing really cool and important work, because what we find is a lot of times folks go to their faith leaders before they go to a doctor. And so being able to educate the community with mental health first aid and your congregations starting to implement that in some of the youth stuff and overall in their congregations. But I'm happy to share any of that information with anybody who's interested, because it is going to take not just siloing it to all of our leaders up here, but putting it everywhere in our life and having those conversations. So I appreciate that question. That's really important.
Can we give our panelists a round of applause, please? You want to do one more? You want to do
Sure,
one
we
more
can take
real
one
quick?
more.
Yeah. We're just watching time, that's all.
Sorry. In children-wise, so having, I'm going to say toddler, maybe 4 to 10, when they go through a tragedy or, something in their lives, talking about it, reliving it, how do we bring up the certain words to talk about without bringing up that trigger, as we say, to trigger them of like, I don't want to talk about it because I don't want to relive that situation. How do we go about that?
I think I heard most of your questions, so stop me if I get off. But with someone a younger age, so it sounds like early elementary to late elementary, that have had some kind of trauma, I think one of the mistakes we make is, and it's well-meaning, is we push them to retell the story again and again, thinking that's going to in some way relieve some pressure. And if they want to talk about some of the details of the experience, then by all means let them. But even with young, I wouldn't encourage a parent or a clinician to push them to retell all the yucky details of whatever might have happened to them, although that tends to be our instinct. But even educating someone that age, when
it's already happened, the conversation of not reliving it, but just that asking a question, are you still okay after the math of what's happened? Bringing it up.
Yeah, so part of that, if there's been something hard happen, it's educating them, because at that age they may have even a physiological reaction that they may not connect. This is related to this terrible thing that may have happened to me, and so some education on their part that if this happens, this could be related to this. If you're having nightmares that you didn't have before, if your tummy's hurting every time you eat, and I don't really know what that is, that there's some comfort in knowing that your body reacts a certain way when you've been through something hard. And I think that's probably the easiest way to bring it up, is through an educational approach and preparing them in advance for, you're going to have some responses like this, and it doesn't mean anything's wrong. It's how your body's letting all that stress out.
Just to add to something, so you said the age group was 4 years, right? Toddlers, yeah. So adults can express their emotions through words, kids cannot, right? So they express their emotions through play. A lot of time, just give them the toys, and we do a play therapy, but not easily available every time, but give them toys, and if that is coming up in their play, they will show those violence in their play. It would come up, right? You do not have to say anything. Let them play. Give them multiple toys. We call sand therapy. You guys can look into that. And there are a lot of toys and sand they play. It's going to come up in those play, and just observe it, right? If it just keeps coming back, like the violence image or whatever trauma has happened, keep coming back on that play, then you can slowly talk about it. Not necessarily the first time, second time, third time. Let them play. It's going to come away. Now, a parent and a kid were in a car accident, for example, right? It's a trauma. They got saved. They were in hospital. Luckily, nothing happened. Not a single scratch happened to them. But it's a trauma, right? A life-threatening trauma. A parent might have a different resilience factor. A kid might have a different resilience factor. Maybe parents thinking, oh, my kid will also having those nightmares, or my kid also getting depressed. Maybe not. His resilience factor is very different. So instead of putting our own thoughts in the kids and thinking, he might also be suffering from that, he may completely recover from that trauma and be very normal in his life. That's why we say that, put them back to school, or do not keep them at home a longer time. Just put them back into their normal life, and if they're doing good, they're doing good. We don't have to worry about it. But it's a good thing that you keeping an eye on them. It's a very good idea. Sometimes sexual trauma, sexual abuse is more common than I was thinking before. When I was in psychiatry, I was reading the books, but it's very common, very, very common in the community. So that would come up in the play therapy. They would be acting out, doing those things. Again, if it's coming out, keep an eye, and then you can take a professional help for them. Not necessarily we does not have to talk with them directly as a parent, but we can provide them the help which is in the community for that. I hope it answers the question.
Once again, a round of applause for our panelists, please. Dr. Mathias, I was going to ask you one final question as we wrap up here. What would be your best piece of advice you can leave our guests when, as you always say, whether you're asking for a friend or for themselves? Can you just kind of leave us with a tidbit of that?
Yeah, just effing ask. I think that's it. Seriously, though, I think that it comes down to that. For whatever reason, like I said, we feel uncomfortable for some reason. But just asking that question, being present, that is the connection is the beginning to recovery. It really, really is. I've seen it for 20 years. And that would be what I would say, is just make the connection no matter how scared you are.